It's not often we get the opportunity to come, but I always look forward to coming here and being with you all. This is part 3 of a series that I've been working on, and so I apologize if we're jumping ahead into history, and I've really covered ground on parts 1 and 2, which will be available shortly. So some of what I'll be speaking about today is building upon parts 1 and part 2. And when we look at the history of the church, we have some very, very wonderful testimonies and stories how God worked, and we also have some very sad stories of what has happened, and some of these we'll draw out and see how we can apply and learn from these principles. So I was wondering if we could just have just another short prayer before we begin. Father, I pray that you will be with us today, that Lord you'll filter my words, my mind, that Lord you'll bring to remembrance things that our brothers and sisters need to hear. And I pray, Lord, that your presence will be with us, empower us. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So if you could just turn to, actually it's all on the screen anyway, but we're going to start off with Revelation chapter 10. In parts 1 and part 2 we covered how God raised up the church, the Seventh Day Adventist church, through the Millerite movement. And we demonstrated how the Seventh Day Adventist church is the remnant church of Bible prophecy, and that God raised this church for a special work. And we find some of this history in Revelation chapter 10, starting from verse 1. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as the pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth for ever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, and that there should be time no longer. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets. And the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again, and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel, and he said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand, and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey, and as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, Thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. As we study the book of Revelation chapter 10, we find that little book that was opened is the book of Daniel, that was sealed up in the book of Daniel. Remember in the book of Daniel where the angel said, Seal up the book, seal up the vision? In Revelation 10, that vision is now unsealed. And that message came through the Millerite movement, through William Miller. And this message was the message that was given to the Millerites. And we know that the message that primarily they were given was the first and second angels' messages. Then there's something that transpired called the 7 thunders. And you don't really hear much about the 7 thunders and what it relates to. But the angel tells John to seal it up. Don't talk about the 7 thunders. And then it talks about how, John was to eat this little book, And we know that the experience happened where the Millerites had such joy that they believed Christ was coming in 1844, and then they had the great disappointment. So the message was sweet, but the end result was bitterness in the belly. But in verse 11 we're told that we must prophesy again. And this is something how the Seventh Day Adventist Church has been raised up to prophesy again. To prophesy the Millerite message, what they had, the first and second angels' messages. But we were also given another message. What was the other message? The third angel's message. And we start seeing an introduction to that in chapter 11 of Revelation 10. And also we see in Revelation 11 the message of the sanctuary. So we see that we must prophesy again, but with the correct view and understanding. This is taken from Second Selected Messages, page 102. There are those now living who, in studying the prophecies of Daniel and John, received great light from God as they passed over the ground where special prophecies were in process of fulfillment in their order. They bore the message of time to the people. The truth shone out clearly as the sun at noonday. Historical events showing the direct fulfillment of prophecy were set before the people, and the prophecy was seen to be a figurative delineation of events leading down to the close of this earth's history. The scenes connected with the working of the man of sin are the last features plainly revealed in this earth's history. We know that the man of sin is the Pope, the papacy. So we know that the closing scenes of earth history is connected and linked in with the papacy. Also, when she's talking about historical events and this figurative delineation of events, she's actually referring to the seven thunders. The people now having a special message to give to the world, the third angel's message. Those who in their experience have passed over the ground and acted a part in the proclamation of the first, second and third angels' messages are not so liable to be led into false paths as are those who have not had an experimental knowledge of the people of God. This is taken from the Bible commentary, page 971. No less a person than Christ. The mighty angel who instructed John was no less a personage than Jesus Christ. Setting his right foot on the sea and his left upon the dry land shows the part which he is acting in the closing scenes of the great controversy with Satan. This position denotes his supreme power and authority over the whole earth. The controversy had waxed stronger and more determined from age to age, and will continue to do so to the concluding scenes when the masterly working of the powers of darkness shall reach their height. Satan, united with evil men, will deceive the whole world and the churches who receive not the love of the truth. But the mighty angel demands attention. He cries with a loud voice. He is to show the power and authority of his voice to those who have united with Satan to oppose the truth. After these seven thunders utter their voices, the injunction comes to John, as to Daniel in regard to the little book. Seal up those things which the seven thunders uttered. These relate to future events which will be disclosed in their order. Daniel shall stand in his lot at the end of the days. John sees the little book unsealed. Then Daniel's prophecies have their proper place in their first, second, and third angels' messages to be given to the world. The unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. So this thing here with the seven thunders, I believe, and we understanding this to be, was a short period of history of the Millerite experience, what they went through, what they were going to go through. And then at the bottom it says the unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. This was the message relating to the 2,300-year prophecy. The books of Daniel and the Revelation are one. One is a prophecy, the other a revelation. One a book sealed, the other a book opened. John heard the mysteries which the thunders uttered, but he was commanded not to write them. The special light given to John, which was expressed in the seven thunders, was a delineation of events which would transpire under the first and second angels' messages. So basically he was shown a history of the Millerite experience, I believe from 1840 to 1844. William Miller was preaching his message way before 1840. But in 1840 something happened. A prophecy what's called the trumpets, the sixth trumpet, there was a prophecy which outlined the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And there was someone called Josiah Litch, and he gave the prediction that the Ottoman Empire would collapse exactly on the 11th of August 1840. And he based that on the day for a year principle. We find this in great controversy. And when that took place, a lot of people said that this is a joke. But when the date came, 11th of August 1840, the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And thousands of people embraced the message. There was a power that was given to the first and second angel's messages that took place in 1840. Sorry, the first angel's message in 1840. The second angel's message came in 1842. What was the second angel's message? What does it say, the second angel's message? Anyone? Come out of her, my people. What happened in 1842? Anyone? The doors of the churches were closed to the Millerite preachers. Between 1840 and 1842, all the churches said, we want William Miller, we want the Millerites to come preach. But in 1842, the churches shut the door. They said, this is error, we don't believe this. And then in 1843, they recognized that this was fulfillment of the second angel's messages. And that's when they believed, between 1843 and 1844, that the churches now were Babylon, or part of Babylon. It was not best for the people to know these things, for their faith must necessarily be tested. And brothers and sisters, our faith is going to be tested shortly too. In the order of God, most wonderful and advanced truths would be proclaimed. The first and second angels' messages were to be proclaimed, but no further light was to be revealed before these messages had done their specific work. This is represented by the angel standing with one foot on the sea, proclaiming with the most solemn oath that time should be no longer. This time which the angel declares with a solemn oath is not the end of this world's history, neither of probationary time, but of prophetic time. And we understand that at the time of 1844, there is no more prophetic time after that. And today we have a lot of people reinterpreting time prophecies. We have the 1290, 1335 coming up with all kinds of dates. But we're told in the spirit of prophecy in the Bible that time is no longer. Prophetic time stops, which should precede the advent of our Lord. That is, the people will not have another message upon definite time. After this period of time, reaching from 1842 to 1844, there can be no definite tracing of the prophetic time. The longest reckoning reaches to the autumn of 1844. The angel's position with one foot on the sea, the other on the land, signifies the wide extent of the proclamation of the message. It will cross the broad waters and be proclaimed in other countries, even to all the world. The comprehension of truth, the glad reception of the message, is represented in the eating of the little book. The truth in regard to the time of the advent of our Lord was a precious message to our souls. The angel who unites in the proclamation of the third message is to lighten the whole earth with his glory. A work of worldwide extent and unwanted power is here brought to view. The Advent movement of 1840 to 44 was a glorious manifestation of the power of God. The first message was carried to every missionary station in the world. And in this country, there was the greatest religious interest which has been witnessed in any land since the Reformation of the 16th century. But these are to be far exceeded by the mighty movement under the loud cry. Where do we find this movement under the loud cry? Revelation 18. Revelation 18 is exactly the same message as Revelation 14, the second angel's message. So we're told that this great manifestation of power between 1840 and 1844, we're going to exceed it in our time before Christ's coming. The work will be similar to that of the day of Pentecost. Servants of God and their faces lighted up and shining with holy consecration hasten from place to place to proclaim the warning from heaven. You see, we talk a lot about the latter rain, and we talk about the great revival and second Pentecost and Pentecost again, and all our revival series is, Pentecost number 2 or Pentecost number 3. But how I'm understanding is the only way we're going to receive this power of the latter rain is if we fully understand the message of the Millerite movement and what they represented and what they taught. In Revelation chapter 22 it says, "And he saith unto me, Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still, and he which is filthy, let him be filthy still, and he that is righteous, let him be righteous still, and he that is holy, let him be holy still." When does this take place? At where? At the close of probation. So what does verse 10 say? It says, "Seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book." So in chapter 10 we had the seven thunders are sealed, but now just before the close of probation we're told to unseal it. So very soon this thing of the seven thunders is going to be made plain and clear to the people of God. You know, as the pioneers were aging, Sister White gave special instruction to John Loughborough. She said that as the pioneers are dying, new people coming to church are no longer understanding who we are and where we came from. And he was given a special work to go around the churches to relive the 1840 to 1844 experience and how the church started and how we became Seventh Day Adventists. And I think in the 17, 18 years that I've been an Adventist, I think I've only ever seen one presentation on the history of the church and a little set of videos called Keepers of the Flame. Nothing else. And I think the time now has come that we need to go back to the pioneers so that we stop getting ourselves into trouble and into problems. This is taken from Review and Herald, August 19, 1890. When the third angel's message is preached as it should be, what happens? Power attends its proclamation, and it becomes an abiding influence. It must be attended with divine power, or it will accomplish nothing. I am often referred to the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom were wise and 5 foolish. This parable has been, and what? And will be fulfilled to the very letter. For it has a special application to what time? This time. And like the third angel's message has been fulfilled and will continue to be present truth till the close of time. I tell you, brethren, when we read that, there's a lot there. When we go back to the parable of the 10 virgins, we see that you had 5 foolish, 5 wise, and they were sleeping. And then what happened? What woke them up? The midnight cry. What was the midnight cry? The midnight cry was the prophetic message given to William Miller. That's what woke the people up. Then what happened? The foolish realized they didn't have enough oil. So they asked the wise, "Can we have some oil?" They said, "No, you need to go and buy some." Then the wise go into the banquet hall, and the doors are closed. And we know that time period when the doors are closed is going to parallel today with I believe the National Sunday Law that's about to hit us. That's what's going to happen. But when did the close of probation really take place for the foolish virgins? Was it when the doors closed, or was it before? It was before, wasn't it? It was while they were sleeping. And we all believe that Jesus is coming back soon and the Sunday laws are coming, but we have to remember that the close of probation for God's people will close sometime before the Sunday laws even come about. And to me that is a scary thought. We think that when the Sunday law comes, that's it, we can be ready. It will be too late. We have to start making decisions. Are we going to be foolish or wise virgins? And what we do today will affect in which resurrection we come up in. There's a great war taking place. There's a great war taking place today, isn't it? Between Christ and Satan. Hatred gripped the United States of America. Civil war was dividing the new land. setting brother against brother, a people against itself. And you know, as I travel around God's people and our churches, there seems to be civil war taking place. Brother against brother, opinion against opinion, doctrine against doctrine, liberals against conservatives. And I believe the reason why we got into such trouble is because we've left the pioneers. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended through gunshot, sword, and pestilences. More soldiers died after the battles than during them, from blood poisoning, infections, amputations, surgery, and the so-called cures of the medical science of the time. And those who never fought in a battle, they died too, from diphtheria, cholera, smallpox, typhoid, scarlet fever, and from the attempted cures of the average doctor. Bleeding, doses of strychnine and arsenic, and just plain uncleanliness were very common. Ignorance disguised as medical science was the cause of most early deaths and disabling illnesses. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made a famous proclamation. It was called the Emancipation Proclamation. And it went into effect. A people held in bondage for almost 2 centuries were declared a free people. 6 months later, the Lord declared another emancipation from common diseases, malnutrition, ill health, and he gave that emancipation through a young woman called Ellen White. Now, we find a lot of issues regarding Ellen White, whether she's a prophet or not a prophet. All of that we covered in parts 1 and parts 2. Every one of us has to make a decision whether we accept her from God or not. She's either from God or she's from the devil. And she says that herself. And we have to make that decision for ourselves. He was about to encounter God's desire for his people on that and another important issues, which is higher than the highest. God took the weakest of the weakest to do the work which was higher than the highest. It was in the house of Brother Hilliard in Michigan, June 6, 1863, that the great subject of health reform was opened to Mrs. White in vision. It was a quiet Friday evening. The sun was setting. A small group of Adventist workers gathered for worship. Among them were James and Ellen White. Ellen was asked to pray. In the middle of her prayer, she was taken in vision to the Garden of Eden, where she saw Adam and Eve, and the close relationship which existed between physical well-being and our spiritual welfare. From this vision, a great step forward towards health reform began. Then she saw the people of Noah's time and the years following, how indulgence of appetite and wrong living habits brought degeneration to humanity. Ellen White saw the danger of poisonous drugs which were being used in her day as cures. And these drugs in her day are no better than, I believe, the drugs, or some of the drugs, we have in our day. She saw that a simple diet of fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables was the best. She saw that the Lord was preparing a people to meet him, and he was calling them back to the simple diet which he had originally provided for them. When the nation of Israel, when they left Egypt during the Exodus, and they were about to come into the Promised Land, what diet were they given? They were given manna from heaven. And that food, we're told in I think Psalm 78, they were given angels' food. This was the food of angels. And they were being groomed and prepared for the Promised Land. And likewise, I believe that Christ is preparing his people now for the Promised Land. But what did the people say to God? What did the nation of Israel do? They grumbled. And they cried and said, Lord, give us meat. Give us flesh, like in Egypt. And God gave them their desire. And what happened? They got sick and they died. Are we going to make the same mistake? Are we going to cry and grumble against the very message that God has given to prepare us for his coming? She also saw that we should care for the sick by using natural remedies like water, fresh air, sunshine, rest, exercise, and trust in God. In essence, New Start. She saw much of that in one vision, and what she saw was revolutionary. But how could she ever go about changing the health habits of over 3,000 people in the Seventh Day Adventist Church and millions around the world? Part of the answer came through the printed page. Soon 6 pamphlets were published entitled Health or How to Live. Each pamphlet dealt with a basic part of health reform: diet, drugs, fresh air, care of children, dress. And people read these pamphlets or heard Ellen White speak about health reform, and many changed their habits. A health revolution was underway, but more guidance was needed, and it came as a Christmas gift in 1865. At that time, Ellen White received another vision on health. God's people must make rapid progress in bringing their lives into harmony with His will on the question of health. Her counsel was that we should provide a home for the afflicted and those who wish to learn how to take care of their bodies, that they may prevent sickness. Hearing Ellen White speak of this urgent need were men like Elder J. N. Loughborough. His heart was stirred. He and Elder Wagner raised the money and helped to organize the first Seventh-day Adventist health institution. It was called the Western Health Reform Institute, located in Battle Creek. Its doors opened September 1866. It was only a large house with treatment rooms built in the back, but a dramatic new chapter in God's work of healing began. In the same year, the Adventists also began a monthly health journal entitled The Health Reformer. The concepts presented were revolutionary and sound. For the first issue, Ellen White wrote an article entitled Our Duty to Know Ourselves. Later, the Health Reformer changed its name to The Good Health. In 1903, Life and Health took its place. Soon after the Health Institute opened, James and Ellen White was encouraged by John Harvey Kellogg. This is a statement taken from Counsels on Diet and Foods. If all who profess to obey the law of God were free from iniquity, my soul would be relieved. But they are not. Even some who profess to keep all the commandments of God are guilty of the sin of adultery. What can I say to arouse their benumbed sensibilities? Moral principles, strictly carried out, becomes the only safeguard of the soul. If ever there was a time when the diet should be of the most simple kind, it is now. Meat should not be placed before our children. Its influence is to excite and strengthen the lower passions, and has a tendency to deaden the moral powers. Grains and fruits prepared free from grease and in an as natural a condition as possible should be the food for the tables of all who claim to be preparing for translation to heaven. The less feverish the diet, the more easily can the passions be controlled. Gratification of taste should not be consulted irrespective of physical, intellectual, or moral health. Among those who are waiting for the coming of our Lord, meat eating will eventually be done away. Flesh will cease to form a part of their diet. We should ever keep this end in view, and endeavor to work steadily towards it. I cannot think that in the practice of flesh eating we are in harmony with the light which God has been pleased to give us. All who are connected with our health institutions, especially should be educating themselves to subsist on fruits, grains and vegetables. If we move from principle in these things, if we as Christian reformers educate our own tastes and bring our diet to God's plan, then we may exert an influence upon others in this matter which will be pleasing to God. So if we're really preparing for the close of probation, then our diet needs to become more simple and move towards the diet of the Garden of Eden. James and Ellen White sponsored John Harvey Kellogg to go into medicine. At the age of 24, Kellogg became superintendent of the Health Reform Institute, and he became the editor of the journal. The institute grew and the magazine grew, and he took the business, the institution, from debt to profit. Soon thousands were coming every year to this world-renowned health institution, whose name Dr. Kellogg changed to the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The health revolution had arrived and achieved a good start. But the spiritual needs of God's people were never ignored. The idea of holding annual camp meetings was revived in 1868. The first Seventh Day Adventist camp meeting was held in Michigan. As many as 2,000 people attended these revival and evangelistic meetings. The idea caught on, and soon camp meetings were being held all over the United States. The Lord was leading his people step by step towards wholeness. They were ready for the next big step in having the image of the Creator restored in their lives. That step was education, and it began with stomach trouble. In 1868, Mr. Goodloe Bell, a teacher suffering from stomach trouble, began a school for Adventist children in Battle Creek. But the going was tough. Most Adventists at that time did not understand the need for a school operated by their church. But Bell did not give up, and by 1872, the General Conference Committee voted to sponsor Bell's school as the first official Seventh-day Adventist school. But Goodloe Bell, he received a lot of opposition. And you know why he received this opposition? Because he didn't have a PhD. Because he wasn't a professor. Because he didn't study at the great universities. People said, how can this man teach our children? Then in 1872, Ellen White received special instruction from the Lord concerning the education Seventh-day Adventist young people should receive. The words were dramatic. Because time is short, we should be in earnest and work zealously to give the young that education which is consistent with our faith. Can our young people get this education from the schools of Babylon and the world that's consistent with our faith? The greatest care should be taken in the education of youth to so vary the manner of instruction as to call forth the high and noble powers of the mind. True education is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. It prepares the student for the joy of service in this world and for the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. You see, the schools of Babylon and the philosophy is not about being useful for society. It's about being useful to yourself, about getting degrees, getting an education that will further your career. But the schools of the Adventist Church was to prepare men and women to prepare for Christ's coming, for active labor, to be faithful missionaries, to be self-supporting. This was the purpose for our education. The Adventist people responded to the call of the Lord. They purchased approximately 15 acres of land in Battle Creek. The first Seventh-day Adventist college was dedicated on that land in January 1875. You know, when the brethren bought this college and this land, Ellen White cried. She said this was not the place to buy the college. She gave them special instruction where to buy the land, how much land to get, where to get it. And they took her counsel and dissected it, and they said, well, we'll just take the bits we like. And then we got this place. And look, didn't we follow the counsel of the Lord? And she wept when they bought it. But then she said, all right, you've done it now. Let's make the best of a bad situation. The Adventist work had begun in the East, but by the 1870s it was moving westward. So, just coming back to this education, what were the issues? There was a conflict between classical and practical education. Classical was what was being taught in the schools, history, mathematics, Latin, the classical type studies, versus practical. Some of the issues were revolving around degrees of learning. Brother Bell did not have a degree. He didn't have a professorship. And the people thought that we needed we needed someone who had a professorship to run the school. So instead of making Goodloe Bell the head of the school, they brought in people that had a PhD. Goodloe Bell was trained at Oberlin College. This was a Protestant college, and this college was basically taught very much the principles that Ellen White was dealing with about a practical, useful education. But it was not recognized. The degree from this college was not recognized by the world. Then they brought this man called Brother Brownsberger. He had a PhD, and all he knew was classical. So he was teaching one thing, and Sister White was teaching another thing, and it was not in harmony. So eventually Brother Brownsberger resigned. But instead of putting Goodloe Bell back in charge, they got this guy, Brother McClure, another PhD, and there was civil war at the college. And eventually Goodloe Bell was pushed out. It almost caused a split in the church. By the way, Battle Creek School was moved. The school was moved at the urging of Ellen White by brothers Percy McGann and Edward Sutherland. Because the original plan for Battle Creek had gone off the rails, Ellen White insisted, move the college and start again. But the problem was that the people that were moving with it, they still had this idea of the PhD, the degrees, the classical types of learning. So Percy McGann and Edward Sutherland, they were getting persecution as well. Just a little bit about Percy McGann and Edward Sutherland. They founded the world-famous Madison College. This college was set up to help the Southern work and also to be a blueprint school. It was also the only institution that Ellen White was a board member. All the different institutions, she did not become a board member. It was the only one, and it was the only institution that was not owned by the conference. And so she added support and weight to it by joining the institution. It was persecuted by the conference. They didn't like the idea of this school taking conference money, taking donations, and the biggest person that did not like the school was Elder Daniels. This school in the 1940s was featured in Reader's Digest. They were so impressed with this school that it was a major article that you could go into this school with no money, get a world-class education, come out with a skill and a trade, and actually leave the college with some money in your pocket. Eventually, they had this idea that the school should be accredited. Once all the Adventist schools went into accreditation, the school system basically collapsed. Because as soon as you try and accredit something, the world then takes place and starts dictating what and what cannot be done. And eventually, to keep up with the pace, Madison College became accredited, and as a result, it went into debt and it crumbled. The church eventually bought the institution and basically sold off all the property, and the sanitarium was eventually basically handed over to the Catholic Church to run. So it was a very sad story from what was the ideal blueprint school, and it just crumbled into the dust. So the Advent message, it was to go to everywhere. So pioneers went all over the country. Missionaries were sent to California via the long and dangerous trip by ship from New York to the Isle of Panama. Crossing the isthmus by train, they then resailed north to San Francisco. Two of the first were elders John Loughborough and Daniel Bordeaux. They raised up 5 Seventh Day Adventist churches in California, and it was because of the work of these two men was how A.T. Jones became a Seventh Day Adventist. In 1872, James and Ellen White also came to the Pacific coast, traveling across the vast country in the new railroad. James White, always looking into the future with pioneer eyes, felt the church needed an evangelistic paper on the Pacific coast. And on April 1st, 1874, Ellen White was shown in vision that we would have a paper published on the West Coast. She also saw that we would have a publishing house and a sanitarium there. This at a time when there were only 400 Adventist believers in the Rocky Mountain area. By that summer in 1874, James White could wait no longer for the vision to be fulfilled. He started publishing what he called the religious weekly newspaper, and he called it the Signs of the Times. Is that the very paper that you came in, Signs of the Times? During the first year of publication, James White had to sell his home to raise enough money to keep the paper going. But the paper was desperately needed, and the Lord's hand was upon it. Would you sell your home to start a work? That's what James White did. You know, James White and Ellen White were always criticized for doing this work to make money. Everyone said, you just do this and make money and you pocket the money. They ended up in debt. When Ellen White died, she was in debt. And yet she's the very one that says, shun debt like the plague. So this man, James White, he sold his house so that this church paper can continue. A year later, at a camp meeting in Yountville, California, Elder G.I. Butler appealed to the 300 to 400 people there to start a publishing house. The believers responded with open hearts and hands. They raised over $19,000 in one afternoon, a good start to the work. A little over a year later, in 1876, the small group of believers finished building a publishing house in Oakland, California. Soon, the Pacific Press started printing magazines and books filled with the messages of the three angels. In the 1870s, the church began to glimpse its mission to other countries around the world, and its missionary thrust began in 1874 with Jane Andrews sailing to Europe. But the outreach in America grew rapidly also. In 1878, James and Ellen White drove up a narrow winding road to the St. Helena Sanitarium. Another Adventist health institution began as a direct result of the Lord's guidance. Next came a college for the Pacific Coast, for education was a strong focus with James and Ellen. In 1882, Hillsburg College opened its doors. This college would eventually become Pacific Union College. But today, I'm afraid, it's a little bit of a concrete jungle. In those days, we were told to have our colleges in the country where there's lots of space, but because of money issues, lots of the lands that we used to own were sold and sold and sold until you can't tell any difference anymore. This college would eventually become Pacific Union College. Back in the East, the work was also growing. In 1882, South Lancaster Academy began educating Adventist young people. From the original group of 19 students, it would develop into Atlantic Union College, now enrolling over 1,000 students each year. There was also growth in theological understanding, though sometimes painful and controversial. During the 1888 General Conference held in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the question of righteousness by faith came to the forefront. Two men led out in reaffirming righteousness by faith, Elders A.T. Jones and E.J. Wagner. Both of these young leaders in the church were strongly supported by Ellen White. But these two young people, they were persecuted. During this conference, many people took sides. You had one side, you had Wagner and Jones and Ellen White, and the other side you had the majority of the General Conference leaders. And people were caught in the middle. And there was great conflict. And a lot of it, you know, one of the things I find is because they didn't like the message that was being presented, they would start attacking their characters. And this is what I find. If you don't like someone's what they've got to say, they start attacking, the way he preached, or the way he said it. It's not what you said, it's the way you said it. Or they'll criticize him for his diet, or they'll criticize him for something to negate the message that was being presented. Of the 1888 conference, she wrote, "The Lord in his great mercy sent a most precious message to his people through elders Wagner and Jones. It presented justification through faith in the surety. It invited the people to receive the righteousness of Christ, which is made manifest in obedience to all the commandments of God. Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us. I want you to take the rich promises of God and hang memory's halls with them. Oh, how I love him. I love him, for he is my love. I see in him matchless charms, and oh, how I want that we shall enter in through the gates into the city." But the people rejected it. So Ellen and A.T. Jones and Wagner, they went out throughout the country doing camp meetings with the churches, and they took the message directly to the people. They bypassed the General Conference, because the General Conference was basically blocking the message of A.T. Jones getting to the people. It was a momentous General Conference. Some accepted with the renewed emphasis on righteousness by faith, and some left uncertain, and some rejected it. In the part 1, there was a pioneer called Charles Fitch. Charles Fitch was one of the people instrumental in designing the 1843 prophetic chart. But Charles Fitch also wrote a book which was very controversial at his time, and he wrote a book called "Sin Shall Not Have Dominion Over You." And he brought out the concept that the Millerites, the Adventists, can have complete victory over sin. And it was a new concept to the Millerites, and this became part of the message. But as time went along, they lost this understanding of righteousness by faith, and A.T. Jones and Wagner were given special light from the Lord to bring this back to the forefront. Elders Jones and Wagner and Ellen White spent much of their time for the next 2 years presenting the righteousness by faith emphasis in churches and camp meetings. Revivals began and grew as the church experienced rapid expansion. But just as the Lord was preparing his people for even greater service all around the world, just so also there will continue to be painful times. And throughout these times of testing and fire, a clear, encouraging voice would continue to ring out. We have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us in the past. Brothers and sisters, we are at the verge of the close of probation. We haven't got much time to lose. We need to go back and understand the pioneer message, because we're told from the parable of the 10 virgins that that parable was fulfilled and will be fulfilled and will continue to be present truth to our time. We're also told that we're going to repeat the experience of the Millerite movement. And yet they had great power between 1840 and 1844. They had a great power attending that message. And we're told that just before the end of this world, that the latter rain will fall and the loud cry will come, and that will be a greater manifestation than what the Millerites achieved. And despite the good stories and the sad stories, Sister White is telling us we have nothing to fear for the future, except as we shall forget the way the Lord has led us in the past.